evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. There's lots to talk about as usual, and I'm going to have lots of opportunities to interact with the comments again. So do fire in questions and comments. I'll try and bring as many of those up on the screen as I possibly can. Well, I've got lots and lots of topics to talk about tonight. I think a lot of them quite interesting. Why don't we start with my little set of slides I've got here? Oh, that's number 2. Let's start from number 1. I just came across this on social media. This was a league table of the top 10 LGBTQI plus countries in Europe. United Kingdom top of the league. Let's have a look how we got there. So the first one, legal and policy human rights. Right, I'm not quite sure what they would involve, so let's leave that one right. The next column, access to PrEP, and is that state funded? Right, a reminder what PrEP is. PrEP is the drug basically, gay men take if they are planning to have unprotected sex, and it reduces the probability of them contracting AIDS, basically. Now, you may say another way of avoiding that is to not have unprotected gay sex. That's another alternative. But for men who don't want to take that alternative, then the government will pay for them to take this drug in order to protect them. And the UK gets a tick for that. But this is the interesting one. Number of LGBTQ plus charities. So look at that table. So what have we got? Iceland 2, Norway 2, Netherlands 1, Belgium 0, Spain 1, Denmark 6, France 8, Germany 12, but the United Kingdom miles in the lead with 16 LGBTQ plus charities. And we've got a few of our very own in Scotland. So why have we got so many? Well, the reason we've got so many basically is because the government keeps funding them, and they start new ones and extra ones, and the government pours money into them. So that's why we're leading the way in Europe for the number of LGBTQ plus charities. I would suggest, basically all of them are unnecessary. They should all receive 0 taxpayer funding. Right, the next thing, how about that then? Came across that on the internet. God, guns, and Trump. Now, when I was in America a few years ago, I remember being in a shop and saw a sign for sale that said, you'll never take our Bible or our guns. And it just seems so alien, doesn't it, to us, to hear that sort of association, or to see a cap like that. It just looks absolutely bizarre, doesn't it? Now, thinking about it from a sort of Christian point of view, the word you'd use for that is syncretism. It's taking the Christian faith and it's adding other things alongside it or in it and combining them all together into one package. And that is not good at all. But does that happen in Britain? Well, I don't think we're going to get I don't know, conservative guns and Rishi Sunak or something or anything like it, or anything similar from any other party. So are we exempt from this danger of syncretism, of dividing, of bringing other things together with Christianity and then presenting it as all part of the faith? Well, in America, I think right-wing syncretism is a big issue. I think a lot of Christians bring in their right-wing political values sort of into their faith, and they get mixed up and they become all part and parcel of the same thing. And that's a big danger. I think in the UK, and certainly in Scotland, I think right-wing syncretism is quite rare. Maybe during the Brexit campaign, there's maybe a little hint of it started coming out. People saying, Brexit's part of Christian teaching. There's definitely Christians should be for Brexit, that sort of thing. Brexit's part of being a Christian. So some people just started ahead in that way a little bit. But right-wing syncretism, I think, is pretty rare in Britain. In Britain, the issue is left-wing syncretism, where people take left-wing, progressive, liberal ideology and bring that into their Christian faith and start to regard it as part of their Christian faith. And I think that is a major issue in Britain, and particularly in Scotland. I think a lot of churches, unfortunately, are infected with sort of left, liberal, progressive syncretism. God, guns, and Trump. Is that any more outrageous than some of the messages we'd hear from some so-called churches in Scotland? Well, I think it's probably about as far from the mark as they are. So that's a little look at that. Right, something else has been in the news, just while on the Christian theme, the golden syrup rebrand. Have you followed that story? Golden syrup traditionally has had a picture, basically a dead lion with a crowd of bees around it, based on a Bible verse that talks about the sweet coming from the strong, and the idea is that the bees make honey within a dead lion, and the honey comes out of it. It's a riddle, basically. So there's no like valuable biblical teaching in it. It's just a little story that happens to come from the Bible. And they've redesigned their logo, and they've taken away the few words from the Bible, but they've still got the picture of the lion and a little picture of a bee next to it. Now, some people have sort of objected to this and said that, this is secularization, whatever. To be honest, I don't think it's a big deal or any deal at all. I mean, they're a company that can brand their products as they like, obviously. But the logo has still got the thing, and eventually it will become a pub quiz question. Why does Lyle's Golden Syrup have a picture of a lion and a bee? And most people won't know, but some people will, and they'll, good luck to them in the pub quiz. So as far as I'm concerned, that was a bit of a non-issue for me. I suppose the reason I'm telling that is I think it's important to not be in the mindset that you're on one side or another, and if there's ever anything you can have a go at from our side, then you have to have a go at it, and we automatically all pile on that issue. That's not the ideal mindset. We need to be a bit more discerning. Now, that doesn't mean I think I sort of get it right every time, knowing and exercising that discernment, but I think that's something that we need to do. Right, I was out in Glasgow today. I had the day in Glasgow mainly to go to a wedding to the daughter of Dave Richardson, our chairman. So Joanna and Chris got married. Quite an encouraging story for me. Chris went along to the church there for the first time because I was speaking there, and he was interested to hear me speaking. So he came along. He wasn't a Christian at the time. So he went to the church, came to the service when I was there, and then kept coming to the subsequent services and became a Christian, and is now married the pastor's daughter. So that's quite a heartwarming story. Certainly very encouraging from my point of view. So best wishes to the happy couple there. Now, while I was in Glasgow, I had a wander around the Kelvingrove Museum. And you can imagine what's coming next. Con, well, before we get to the museum, actually, I went around the botanical gardens as well. And in their glass house, there's a sculpture of Ruth, the biblical character. There's quite a few Christian things coming up first, just coincidence. And the biblical character. And the caption under it said that Ruth was revered for being something like, I can't remember the exact wording, good-natured and compliant or something. I mean, two qualities were listed. And then it said, so she used to be seen as a role model for girls. How about that then? So the biblical figure used to be seen as a role model for girls, but obviously we're more enlightened now. And the subtext is the feminists have realized that girls don't need to be like that after all. And we've now broken free from these sort of outdated role models. But then I went along to the Kelvingrove Museum, and you go into the, I don't know what you call it, atrium, I don't know what you call it, the big area where you go. And foyer doesn't sound grand enough, but the entrance hall, if you like, where the organ is. And there's a display board there, and it does all the decolonializing, and it says this museum is a museum to empire. And there's a panel basically saying, Scotland was the worst country in the world because it did so many bad things. It's unbelievable. And all poor countries are victims, and Scotland's only wealthy because it was really bad. I mean, it's not the exact quote, but that's the sort of gist of what it was saying. So nothing positive about Britain and Scotland's glorious past, defeating evils in 3 world wars running. The Napoleonic Wars were a world war, really. Abolishing slavery, suppressing the slave trade around the world, etc., etc., etc. And the British Empire as well was a mixed influence in the world. In many ways, it had a positive effect on countries. So totally unbalanced. So the museum have obviously got into the sort of hard left ideology there, and they wanted to dominate the museum. So they've got this little display board in the central hall, but then around the rest of the museum, there seemed to be virtually nothing. And I thought, what's going on here? But then the thought dawned on me. I think the reason why there's just one little display board in the main area is the Glasgow City Council has run out of money, and they can't afford to go like politically infecting the rest of their museum with that ideological messaging, which is great. And I was thinking probably the reason they can't afford to do that is because Glasgow City Council is skint because it lost the best part of £1 billion, going on half of its annual budget, well, more than half of its annual budget, to an equal pay claim a few years ago. And so that's quite interesting, isn't it? So the sort of social justice ideology has bankrupted, not quite, has severely hit the finances of Glasgow, which means that they're unable to waste their money promoting that very same political ideology in their museums. So that maybe is a bit of a sort of poetic justice about that. Just on the same issue, these sort of equal pay claims, just to remind you what they are. An equal pay claim occurs where you have a council, for example, with different jobs available. They advertise the jobs. Men and women could apply for whichever job they like. So you could apply to be a grave digger and work out in the cold and the rain, hard physical labor all day. Or you could be, for example, I don't know, say a school cleaner, which, that might be hard work as well, but it's indoors. You don't get cold and wet and dirty, and maybe not quite so physical. But anyway, you can take a pick. You can apply for whichever job you want to apply for. So what happened in the past? Generally, men applied to be grave diggers, for example. Women applied to be school cleaners in general, for example. And so they did the jobs they wanted to do, and they got paid accordingly. So when the women decided to apply to be school cleaners, they knew the grave diggers got paid more, but they decided, no, I'm not going to apply for that one. I'm going to apply to be a school cleaner instead. Then they work for decades, and then they get a clever lawyer to go along and make an equal pay claim, to claim that they've suffered pay discrimination for the last 40 years because they weren't paid as much as the grave diggers. They weren't paid as much as the people who chose to do the job that they chose not to do. Now, that's just, it's totally unjust. There's no fairness in it at all. It's just opportunism. It's a warped ideology in practice. And the practice of it is resulted in, I say, Glasgow losing the best part of £1 billion to it out of its £1.5 billion annual budget. I mean, Birmingham has lost £2 billion to an equal pay claim. So Birmingham City Council is bankrupt, So this sort of ideology, this sort of equity ideology, feminist ideology, has bankrupted a council and has had a pretty good go at bankrupting Glasgow as well. And nobody in the political establishment dares speak up against it because they think the numbers don't add up. Lots of women have got £10,000 out of it or whatever. They've made a lot of money. And whose votes do you get by speaking up against it? Well, no one understands it. The media doesn't talk about it. The BBC or the media generally, they're always on the side of these poor oppressed women who've been deprived of their fair pay over the last 40 years. But it is bankrupting councils. It's a terrible threat to businesses as well. Like supermarket chains are facing these equal pay claims as well. I mean, who knows? Maybe it will see off a major supermarket chain as well. So this is disastrous for public services and for businesses. But I say it's going virtually unchallenged because the Scottish Family Party isn't prominent enough yet. But when you join us and support us, we'll be able to challenge these things in the Parliament and elsewhere. Right. Here's a comments. Ian, I was in Oklahoma, walked into the gun range with my driving license, handed a box of bullets and a gun for the range. Yeah, I think in some American states, the gun laws are pretty lax. But I mean, whatever you think about the guns, I think guns are an interesting situation. I sometimes think if I'd been brought up in America, would I be pro-gun? Because everything else about my beliefs would indicate I would be in line with probably the people who are pro-gun. So would I be pro-gun as well? Well, there's no way of answering that question. But certainly looking from where I am, I think the gun policy in America does seem to have significant drawbacks. Let's just put it that way. Okay. Right, next thing to mention. Older MP, Conservative MP Lee Anderson. I've been following that story. He's made some comments about, basically he said Islamists have got control of Sadiq Khan and Keir Starmer. And that caused a bit of a storm, and the Conservative Party ended up suspending him for saying those things. Well, let's have a think about what he said. I mean, Lee Anderson's got a reputation for coming out with some sort of quite extreme, ill-considered, however you want to call them. I mean, certainly his critics have called his comments those things. So Islamists have got control of Sadiq Khan. Well, to decide if that's true or not, we need to know what an Islamist is. don't we? I mean, I would say an Islamist is a sort of Islamic extremist who wants to see like traditional Islamic rule in Britain. That would be one way of looking at it. So they want to see Britain to become like Iran. So they want Sharia law implemented, etc., etc. Now, obviously, not all Muslims would want that. Now, what proportion want that? You can look at various surveys. It's numbers vary. This is where a lot of mainstream politicians would say, 99% of Muslims don't want that. Well, I wouldn't say it's 99%, but a lot of Muslims don't want that. That's not their mindset at all. But for some Muslims, it is. And Muslims who want that, they might want some quite severe forms of punishment implementing, etc. So have Islamists got control of Sadiq Khan? I would say no, they haven't, because the Islamist agenda would involve extremely conservative points of view with regard to LGBT issues. For example, does Sadiq Khan show the slightest sign of being under the control of Islamists when it comes to social issues? And the answer is not a bit. Probably most Islamists would be extremely unhappy. I was going to say detest. I don't know if that's too strong a word, but they would be extremely unhappy with Sadiq Khan. They would see him as a traitor to Islam, as a heretic, someone who denies what he should really believe, what he should really be saying, etc. So to say this in the control of Islamists is really, I think, is not true. So when it comes to this comment, the question shouldn't be, is it offensive? Is it Islamophobic? The question should be, is it true? And I would suggest it's not true. Is he very heavily influenced by some Muslim bloc vote thinking? Well, probably is, yes. Right, Keir Starmer, is he under the control of Islamists? I said, no. I mean, for the same reason and more. I mean, Keir Starmer has tried to steer something of a middle course with Israel and Palestine. And again, his policies on social issues are certainly not in line with Islamist thought. Now, is Keir Starmer mindful of the Muslim support for the Labour Party? Yes. Will that influence him in some ways? Yes. Is he under the control of Islamists? No. So the problem with what Lee Anderson said, I think, is not true. Now, like I was saying earlier, I think we have to avoid the temptation of thinking, right, just because someone said something that's sort of on my side of the argument or the side that I support, then therefore we have to be on his side, rather than saying, okay, well, let's have a look at what he said. Might agree with it, might not agree with it. It's not just a matter of black and white. Is this a goal for our team or is it a goal for their team? We need to be a bit more nuanced than that. So I think what he said wasn't correct. It was ill-considered. Now, a couple more thoughts on this. I had this thought. This is quite an original thought, I think. For someone like Sadiq Khan and Humza Yousaf, when an issue like Israel-Palestine comes along, do they grasp that in the same way that Christian MSPs, for example, might grasp assisted suicide? Let me explain what I mean. So Sadiq Khan, he knows a lot of Muslims completely disagree with him. Like when he bedecks the whole of Regent Street or whatever it was with progress pride flags. I mean, it was like some sort of Hitler Youth rally. There are flags everywhere. Now, when Sadiq Khan does that, he knows that is not endearing him to a large section of Muslims in London. So he knows he's making enemies, but he also knows he needs to say that because that's the overall politically for himself. That's what he thinks is going to work out best. And if he's right or wrong, but that's what he wants to do. So he knows with his normally socially liberal approaches, he's upsetting Muslims. He's making enemies among the Muslims, basically. And then along comes Israel-Palestine, golden opportunity to win them back. You see what I mean? So we think it's a really strong pro-Palestine view. Muslims, many Muslims will think, maybe Sadiq Khan's not so bad after all. Okay, I know he's into all that nonsense, but maybe he's okay after all. Maybe I can support him. Maybe we can stay in the Labour Party. Now, I wonder if that dynamic takes place. Now, I think the same things happens, for example, with Christian MSPs. So when it comes to, abortion or LGB issues, for example, they can be very, 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 very timid to say anything because they're afraid of the sort of black backlash they'll get. And they might worry, or they might know, the Christians are looking at them thinking, you're not saying what you believe. Why don't you speak out and speak the truth here? Someone needs to say this. You need to stand up for what you believe. You need to stand up for what we believe. And you're not doing it. So they feel under pressure. But then assisted suicide comes along, and you've suddenly got an opportunity where you can nail your colors to the mast, really make a big thing of it. I'm completely opposed to this. And then a lot of Christians will think, you see, they're not so bad after all. They were really good on the assisted suicide issue, because assisted suicide isn't controversial in the way the other issues are. So basically, is Palestine, is Gaza to Sadiq Khan as assisted suicide is to Christian MSPs? I think the answer is yes, on the basis I just explained. Right, let's have a look at a few comments. Comments are streaming in now. Robert, bad steward from councillors who've not fulfilled their duty as council taxpayers. Yeah, I think councils are an interesting setup. Who gets elected as councillors? Often it's retired people or people who've been very active in the community. They've been quite good getting a grant for the local community garden and going and helping with that. They've been a school governor. But my problem with this is that could be a route that tends to get nice people elected as councillors, or responsible people. But does it get people with the skill set to run, in some cases, like a multi-billion pounds operation, a huge organization? I'm not sure it does, and I think that might be part of the problem with councils. What's the solution to that? I don't know. The Family Party doesn't have any specific solutions to that. But one solution would be that you vote for the party, then the party can appoint someone to be the leader of the council. They can appoint a team to run the council, and they can recruit those people by whatever means they like, rather than having to pick from the local councils. I don't know, but there is an issue there in any case. Iran terrifying to me in the 1970s was very similar to the UK. It was indeed in the 1970s, the Shah of Iran did enact great secularization in Iran, and Iran looked like a Western country. It might be economically comparable to like Spain or Argentina. I think was doing quite well then as well. But then it had this Islamic revolution and it's gone in a very different and troubling direction. But I think that could change very quickly. I've seen opinion polling from Iran, and when people are confident that there's genuine confidentiality, it seems that in Iran the population is not 99.6% Muslim or whatever it's supposed to be. There are actually a lot of people who don't really, in their heart of hearts, believe the teachings of Islam, but they go along with it because there really isn't much choice. So I think change could come in Iran very quickly, and I suspect it will before too long. Okay, council cleaners work on social hours. Council grave diggers have day jobs. Yeah, that very well may be, but it's up to people to just choose the job they want to do. You look at the salary, you look at the job, and you choose which one you want to apply for. Then that's the same for everyone. Right. Yeah, 99% of women don't have penises. Now, it's fascinating, isn't it? Rishi Sunak mocks Keir Starmer because he doesn't know what a woman is. Right, Rishi Sunak, does he know what a woman is? Rishi Sunak is part of a government that is presiding over and continuing and making no effort to repeal the law that says, well, actually, women can have penises, because in the law, it's possible to change sex. So, I mean, Rishi Sunak talks the talk, but anyone who talks about says, oh, I don't accept all this transgender nonsense, I get it sorted out. Anyone who says that and isn't going to repeal the 2004 Gender Recognition Act, then it's just hot air. It's hot air. Because so long as the state says the official legal view is that a man can become a woman or a woman can become a man, they just need to fill the right forms in, go through the proper government process, and then that's it. Okay. I was going to say Bob's your uncle, but yeah, I could have made a joke out of that. Brenda's your uncle, whatever. So yeah, it's all hot air. I would say that for the other smaller parties as well. Sometimes like Alba, for example. Oh, we're against the transgender stuff. Really? No, they're not. they would still maintain the heart of the problem, which is the official state belief that sex change is possible. Sadiq Khan's allowed jihad to be preached on the streets of London. Yes. I don't know to what degree it's fair to say Sadiq Khan's allowed it. But I think we've been aware of this issue for a long time, haven't we? The police are politicized. In Scotland, in particular, the police are politicized. They get so much equality and diversity training that they're basically taught that progressive, left, liberal, secular sort of ideology, that they're the goodies. They're the goodies. And that comes through in all different ways. Right. What's my opinion on JFK's speech on religion and the separation of church from state? I'm not familiar with it, to be honest. So do send it. Put a link in the comments, whatever. I'll happily have a look at that. Separation of church from state. Absolutely agree. I'm a secularist. With the family party does not want Scotland to declare itself a Christian nation or anything like that. And that's why we're a secular party. Politics is about running the country well on the basis of good values. So what's important for a political party is to have values, principles, and policies that are going to benefit the society. So that's what we're trying to do. Now, if those values are inspired by or informed by religious beliefs, then okay, that's fine. But they're put forward on the basis of the fact that they're going to be best for society. Now, everyone comes to politics with their values and opinions of what's best for society. And whether they come from a secular or a religious perspective, it doesn't matter. Everyone brings their views on the same basis, presents them in the democratic arena, and the electorate responds. So, yeah, that's that. Okay, I think it's almost time to move on to the next little issue. Right, Google it. Right, I'll try to remember to do that. Okay, right, here we go. Sticking with the Islam issue, Israel, Palestine, etc. Is a little interesting thought. Now, I think we're talking about Christianity a lot tonight. I don't normally do that. Anyway, another thing. So just thinking about Israel. Now, if you're brought up as a Christian, if you're reading the Bible, whatever, you're used to thinking of Israel as the goodies, aren't you? Because that's God's people, whatever. Israel, the goodies. So even when Israel are doing something bad, you're still sort of on their side. It's still our team, even if they're doing the wrong thing. So that perspective is probably deeply ingrained in a lot of, if not most, Christians. So on the basis of that ingrained perspective, when they look at contemporary issues in the Middle East, to what extent is the viewpoint of people like me a bit skewed on the basis that you've been brought up with the ethos that Israel are our people? We're on Israel's side. Even if they're doing the wrong thing, we're sort of on their side. We're rooting for Israel. Now, and if that is the case, is that a bad thing? Well, I think it's certainly something to try to be aware of. I would hope to resist the temptation to allow that to color my assessment of what's going on in the Middle East more recently. And in terms of, Christians have various views about is Israel still God's people? How does that work out? I've looked into those things and I find it difficult to come to a conclusion. So I don't really know what I believe about that. But I would certainly say I feel I've got a responsibility to try to look at the issue objectively and be aware of any bias I might have as a result of that sort of background. Another thing that's coming out a lot with the Israel-Palestine things, a lot of talk about Islamophobia. Now, Islamophobia is an interesting thing because with Islam, obviously, in Britain, there have been terrorist attacks. There have been incidents that give cause for concern about the behavior of some Muslims. Looking around the world, there are a lot of issues where Islamic law, Muslim majority countries, there are issues there that we see as problematic and unhelpful. I mean, for example, I saw a video from Pakistan yesterday, I think, where a woman was wearing a dress, a young woman was wearing a dress that had got Arabic script on it. And some men thought that some of the Arabic script looked like something from the Quran. So they thought she was wearing Quran verses on her dress. And so they decided that they needed to kill her. So the police in Pakistan had to protect this woman, lead her to safety, and hopefully she's going to be okay from here on. So things like that, we think, right, that's quite concerning. You can find similar incidents as well involving other religious groups. So I think with Islam, people look at Islam and there are genuine concerns about the ideology and the behavior of some Muslims. Does that mean there's no such thing as Islamophobia? I would say no, because some people can adopt an attitude of just hostility. I think the classic case of that is football crowds. Some supporters of rival football teams can really hate each other to the point that they want to virtually, if not actually, kill each other. They want to fight each other. Such is the level of hostility that's built up. And that hostility is not based on anything rational at all. So when you think about Islam, there's valid concerns that I think you can't deny. In fact, I say it would be irrational to ignore them. But then on top of that might be an irrational just hostility or hatred that is a bad thing, that maybe can justify the term Islamophobia. So it's important, I think, to separate those things and keep them clear. Right, let's have a look at some more things. All police are now graduates. That's a big part of the problem with their politicization. I think taking graduates is going to tend to mean they've been through the process that turns them into the sort of people that we would imagine the government would love to have in the police force. As far as I'm aware, entry into the police force isn't just for graduates. I was looking into it not long ago. I think you can enter with a pretty low level of academic attainment, but then they do their own tests. So probably an increasing proportion of graduates, but not all entrance to police are graduates, unless I've got the wrong end of the stick on that one. But yeah, good point. Good point. Islam is simply not compatible with Western culture. I say it depends on the interpretation of Islam. So there will be some Muslims whose views, basically, if you take a spectrum of Islamic opinion, certainly a section on that spectrum is certainly not compatible. An example I sometimes give of that was went to, where did I go to? Birmingham a few years ago to do a debate with a Muslim, and we went out for a curry afterwards, just the men, and we had a very good time. They were very friendly. We chatted about all sorts of things. It was great. And I was talking to one gentleman there. I think he was a further education lecturer. So I said to him, well, what's your take on democracy? He said, democracy is fine. It's great. Under a supreme religious leader. And he explained that what he meant is you have a democracy, you elect a government that runs the country, but there should be a like Ayatollah type figure above that who checks that the government is operating in accord with Islamic principles. Now, I've got a bit of a problem there, because that's the sort of difference that you can't really resolve democratically. If a party wins the election that says we're now going to have an elected parliament, elected government, but there'll be a religious leader above that who can veto whatever they're doing and make sure it's in line with Islamic law. Now, if a party is getting towards getting power and wants to do that, that's not the sort of issue you can resolve through the democratic process. So that belief is problematic. And I think if a substantial number of people adopt that belief, there's going to be problems in the future. Now, I would hope that most Muslims don't hold that sort of belief, and so there wouldn't be that sort of problems. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like a lot of these exist. The ideal Muslim, if you know what I mean, will be the one socially conservative. We're pro-family, we're pro-life. We've got no time for all this sexualization of children, etc., etc. We want support for families, hard work, education, get on with life. Okay, we happen to be Muslims, but we're not too interested in that. We just want a healthy society. These are our values. Now, that's the sort of Muslims I think are ideal. But then if you get Muslims with more extreme views, then they can be incompatible with Western democratic principles, and then you've got a problem, because there are some conflicts of ideas within a society that you can't solve at the ballot box. Okay, it doesn't work like that, because the culture in Britain is that we're a democracy, different points of view are represented by different parties. They stand in the democratic system, and you end up with some sort of compromise, or it switches between two parties, or whatever. But you can sort out problems that way. So if you don't like the current government, maybe the next one might be bit better, or you might get someone in the parliament giving your point of view, and that might improve things, pull things a bit in your direction. That's the way things need to proceed. But if you have views that are too diverse, like someone who says, we don't want democracy, we want a different system, then you can't resolve that through the democratic process. The process breaks down, and that's a problem that needs to be avoided, ideally. So yeah, that's a little bit about that. Have we got any more comments there? Ban trade on a Sunday. That's an interesting one. The family parties never had a policy about, remember the Keep Sunday Special campaign, this sort of idea of maintaining Sunday as a special day. Part of the reason we've never had that policy is I think as soon as you have it, you're very much seen as a Christian party, and we're not a Christian party. So that's one reason we didn't. The basic idea, though, of having a day of rest, it's actually politically a really good one. If you look at the secular alternative, look at like the EU working directive. I know we're not in the EU anymore. Has the UK government got something the same? Anyway, I don't know. But the EU working directive said you can only work a certain number of hours in a week. So they're trying to prevent people from overworking, because that's bad for them, bad for their families, going to create problems for society as well, as people burn themselves out and get ill or whatever. So that was the EU's attempt at it. But the problem for that is people don't have a common day, when the family is all together, when people in general are not working, so you can do communal things all together. Whereas the idea of the sort of Sabbath Sunday idea is you have a day when as many people as possible are free to spend time together, to do things jointly, family time, other sort of communal activities. So I think moves to keep Sunday as a day with less activity are actually very positive. But let's say the family party has not addressed that as a policy in any way at all. Not work economically. Is that the sort of having a day off thing? If it is, I'm assuming it is. So to answer that, so I think it would. Whatever your business is, are you really going to sell much more of it by being open 6 days instead of 7? If everyone was only open 6 days. I mean, a classic example, car dealers. If you're selling cars and all car dealers are only open 6 days, are any of them going to sell any less cars? No. They're all going to sell just as many cars as they did before, but their overheads will be down because they don't need to pay the staff on a Sunday. And also the staff will be happier. Customers will get their cars. I think it's a good thing. Major shops in the city centre. Not sure how that would go. When it gets tricky, when you get down like the petrol station and the corner shop, or the football game, or whatever. So I think any sort of really strict rule wouldn't be good. It wouldn't work out well. But a general principle to push towards trying to keep Sunday as, if you like, a family day, I think will be positive. Now, lockdown time was interesting, and it was infuriating, and there are lots of issues there. But one thing I heard lots of people say during lockdown is they actually quite liked it. They liked the fact that it was really quiet. There were lots of things that they couldn't do, so they had to go for a walk around their local beauty spots or whatever, and they actually found that was added a lot to their life. Now, obviously, having permanent lockdown, it was a total disaster. But what people were finding during lockdown, in terms of, it was great, we're spending time together as a family, we're going for a walk, we're enjoying nature, these sort of things. Well, is that not what maybe used to happen more? That was the Sunday. So what people are appreciating was what used to be the culture of a Sunday to some degree. Just a thought, but I think there is something in it. Okay. Acceptance of the term Islamophobia can be a blasphemy law by the back door. I agree with that. I think the sort of hate speech legislation, stirring up religious hatred, I think that is concerning. I mean, do I want it to be illegal for people to make sort of obscene, mocking, horrible, offensive comments about Christianity? No, I don't. And nor do I want it to be illegal for people to make obscene, mocking, offensive comments about atheism or any other religion at all. That is not to say that I want to make that sort of comment. That's not to say that people ought to make that sort of comment. But it's just it shouldn't be illegal. So I think, yeah, something like the stern of religious hatred, I think some people, when they hear that, think, right, we've got a chance here if someone says something that upsets me about my religion. And I think that is extremely unhelpful. Must be free to criticize any religion or ideology. Robert, that could well be a quote from Scottish Family Party policy. Our policy says something pretty well exactly like that. Anti-Muslim hatred is a preferable term. Yes. Yeah, I think that could well be true. Right there, Dominic. Not much different than a monarch, right? I take it you're talking about the idea of a sort of Ayatollah type figure above the democracy, right? That's quite a perceptive observation. If the monarch had any power, well, I suppose the monarch does sort of have some power. They tend not to use it, but yeah, that's the sort of idea, though. So it would be like a constitutional monarchy, but the monarch would have significant power. I mean, in British history, if you go back hundreds of years, this was the situation. There was a parliament, but the king or queen could overrule it when they decided to. So the similar sort of system would be what this Muslim gentleman in Birmingham was proposing over. Instead of having a king or queen, hereditary king or queen, there would be a religious leader. I say, but I think that's not what most Muslims want. But people who do want that, that's a problem brewing in the future in Britain if that becomes a widespread point of view. Okay, let's just have a look at what other comments we've got. Yeah, I think just going back to the Sunday issue, obviously people are free to do what they like. I personally try not to do work on a Sunday because that's the most helpful thing to do. I think that's a good discipline and a positive enhancement to my life. So yeah, I would recommend that. But that's a totally different thing than having it as any sort of party policy. Right, next issue. Mary McCallum, the SNP MSP, who is the economy minister at the moment. She's a young lady and she's going on maternity leave. And she's saying that it just shows that you can hold a senior position and have children. Now, I scratched my head a little bit for that because it sounded like she was saying it just shows you can do a really important key job for the nation and have a baby as well as she's going on maternity leave. But I thought, is there not a point of view as well that she's showing that she's actually not doing the job of economy secretary? Yeah, I mean, it's like that seems an obvious truth that an issue, a downside of this is economy secretary is not a really important job for the country that she's been appointed to, and she's now not going to be doing it for how long? I don't know, the best part of a year. I don't know. She's not going to be doing it. So who is going to be doing that job? Someone else might stand in. You'd assume the person who stands in might, well, we're talking in theory here, might not be as good at it as she is. Otherwise, that person would have been chosen to do the job. And maybe other people will come in and cover it one way or another. Again, you'd assume that would not be ideal. So all I'm saying here, I don't know what conclusion I'd want to get to. I'm just saying when this sort of issue is discussed, it must be considered that you've got a key job and someone's not doing it. So if you imagine you're running a business, you appoint someone to an absolutely key position because it's such a vital aspect of your business. You've got to nail this to get the business moving or surviving or whatever. Then that person says, well, I'm actually not going to be at work for 9 months or whatever. That's quite difficult for the employer. So I don't know what conclusion I'm coming to. It just seemed that when this was being discussed in the media, there was an elephant in the room. As she was saying, it just shows you can do both, as she declared that she was only going to do one and was not going to be doing the other. So what the answer to that is, I don't know, but let's at least have an honest conversation. Right. Right, someone's making a comment about bottle feeding. Let's go one worse than bottle feeding, shall we? Let's just have a quick mention of chest feeding, which is transgender women, in other words, men who identify as women. They want to pretend to be women in every aspect of their life. So they want to breastfeed children. And so I'm reluctant to use the word doctor or medics. Some scientists have come up with something where you can give men some drugs and it sort of simulates breast. It makes them secrete something or other from their nipples that is really nothing remotely like a mother's breast milk. And research seems to suggest it doesn't actually do children too much harm. But obviously, the main focus is these men need to be able to fulfill their fantasy. That's the number one priority. And it seems with the NHS, this is from England, I'm sure it'll be the same in Scotland, that prior to the NHS was to reassure these men that yes, they can chest feed just as well as anybody else. Classic case of putting adult desire over the well-being of children. I mean, really frightening to the extent to which that can happen. Surely you would think in the medical profession, what the baby needs is going to be the number one issue, but not a bit of it. The number one is you've got to tick the right boxes in terms of the LGBT ideology. And then somewhere a lot far further down the list comes giving the baby what they need. As HIV positive man chest feeding a baby, right? Wasn't aware of that. The whole HIV thing, it's a few years ago now. There was this controversy. It used to be that you couldn't donate blood if you were a man who had sex with men because of the far higher risk of HIV, for example, and other diseases. So they said you can't donate blood. And basically there's a campaign against that, not on the grounds that there's no risk, but on the grounds that it was discriminatory. Because obviously when it comes to medicine, what matters most is ticking the political ideology boxes rather than actually protecting patients from harm. So there's a campaign on the basis of equality, and that rule did get removed in Scotland, but that was a few years ago now. Right, a little bit of time left. The former Dutch Prime Minister, do you see this story? A former Dutch Prime Minister and his wife died in a suicide pact, assisted by the Dutch sort of health service. And this is a growing trend in the Netherlands. It's interesting to see countries that introduce euthanasia-assisted suicide, to see how it develops. We've all been hearing horror stories from Canada. I think the reason we hear horror stories from Canada is because we're more in tune with the English-speaking alternative media from Canada. But the stories from the Netherlands and Belgium, Luxembourg are just as bad. I mean, there are appalling things happening. But the growing trend in the Netherlands is for married couples to do a deal together to basically be killed together. So the doctor comes along and kills the two of them at the same time, which you can imagine, the BBC is going to present in these as, sweet conclusions to love stories. How romantic is that? The doctor kills both of them at the same time while they were holding hands. Again, the potential for pressure with that is huge, and the whole thing is completely wrong, and we need to fight it. Just a quick update what's happening in Westminster. You might have heard that there's an abortion decriminalisation amendment being tacked onto another bill, and the expectation is that it will pass in March. It's been tacked on something like the Public Order Bill. I mean, my first thought about that, how can it possibly be a good way to legislate? Do you have a law about one thing, and people just tack on something that's nothing to do with that law at all, and the hope of just getting it through to affect another area? It'd be like if you had a bill about, I don't know, dangerous dogs, and you added something about, we're introducing the death penalty at the same time, by the way. That is a terrible way to legislate, isn't it? So you're putting in something really important, which hasn't been discussed. It hasn't been part of a consultation process, and it's just tacked onto a bill that's nothing to do with it. So people might vote for it because they're voting for the rest of the bill, not for that little amendment. So I think the House of Commons needs reforming to stop this happening. As far as I'm aware, I haven't heard of any case where this has happened in the Scottish Parliament. So maybe there's a procedure to stop it happening, or maybe they just haven't thought of it, of trying it. I don't know. But it's a problem. So it's full decriminalisation. So therefore, it wouldn't be a crime for a woman to procure an abortion at any stage of pregnancy without any, forget the doctor's signatures or anything like that. So that's introduced. Let's just have a think about that. The time limits would still apply to medical staff. So if a woman goes to the NHS and wants an abortion and they say, sorry, you're 26 weeks gestation, you can't have one. The woman then knows it's legal for her to have a go herself. So if you can get the abortion pills, then take them, and that's not going to be a crime. You see that? So if you just phone up the hotline, can I have some abortion pills, please? They give these things out like sweeties. So you can get the pills, the woman could take them, kill the baby after the time limit, and that would not be a crime. So the time limit doesn't really exist. Or she could try to get an abortion by whatever other means she wanted to try. Let's not speculate on methods, but whatever else you might try. So let's imagine that this passes, and in a few months' time, some woman will attempt an abortion because the NHS won't do it because after the time limit. So she tries some DIY method. Most likely she takes abortion pills that she's acquired, which are not very difficult. She's acquired them. Maybe a quick lie or whatever, or got them from somewhere else. The baby will die, and the line will then, there might be some complications. The argument will then be, how ridiculous is this? It's legal for this woman to try and get an abortion, but it's illegal for the NHS to help her. What a crazy situation we're in. Surely we need to rationalize the law and make it so the doctor can help this woman. So it's inevitably that very, very quickly, the next step will be full decriminalization for medics and for women as well. So that will mean abortion on demand up to full term for the NHS, which is horrific, but that is going to happen very soon. In England and Wales, abortion law is devolved in Scotland. But do you really think any Scottish government's going to resist jumping on the bandwagon and doing exactly the same thing? I mean, Humza Yousaf in the leadership election campaign, he promised decriminalization up to the time limit. Which I'm not quite sure what he meant by that, but surely the Scottish government would just follow suit in short order. Okay, right, a couple more things to mention. We're starting candidate training before too long, so if you're interested in being a Scottish Family Party candidate, email campaign manager, all one word, campaign manager at scottishfamily.org, and we'll be able to help you there. The training is partly to help you to see what it involves, partly to prepare you if you decide to go for it, and partly for us to get to know you. It's online. I can't remember. I think it might be. I can't remember. It's basically one evening a week for maybe, 5 weeks, just an hour's session. So we talk about what it involves, talk about potential downsides. So you're going to it with open eyes. So as to help you to decide whether it's something you want to do. So we'd encourage you to do that. Quite a few people have done it already, but hopefully we'll get some new people going through the training. Well, I'm sure we'll have some new people going through the training as well. It includes a bit of practice about, doing interviews, answering questions. That's it, but in a very fun sort of way. Have a bit of a laugh together. I'm sure you'd find it interesting and enjoyable. So campaign manager at scottishfamily.org, and you can get on the list. Campaign manager, all one word. Now, I'm going to give a speech about Humza Yousaf in Glasgow in a few weeks' time. What's the date? I think the 20th of March, I think is the date we're going to go for. And it's going to be, I don't know whether to call it a speech or a lecture ever, but I'm going to talk about Humza Yousaf, the man, the myth, the Muslim, the mannequin. There is an awful lot to talk about Humza Yousaf, and it builds up a picture of the political scene in Scotland, and we will look at how basically Humza Yousaf's been on the conveyor belt with the golden ticket to the top job. And while he's been on that conveyor belt with the golden ticket, he's been complaining that he's been discriminated against. We'll look at his judgment on various issues, which has been unsound, so we put it that way. He's made some very interesting decisions over the years. So there's so much to say about Humza Yousaf, and I'm going to devote an evening to a public lecture on Humza Yousaf in Glasgow. So get your tickets. They'll be out very soon. Get your tickets, and it would be great to see you. I am certain that you'd find it very interesting indeed to hear that. I'm doing an interview tomorrow morning with Eric Kaufman, who is a lecturer, a professor at Buckingham University, and his role basically is to look at social sciences from an unbiased perspective, or from a conservative perspective, to balance the overwhelming secular, liberal, progressive skew that there is in like every sociology department, social science department around the whole of Britain. So I'm looking forward to that, to chat with Eric. I probably won't use that in a live stream. I'll publish that on YouTube before too long. And one more thing to mention quickly is there's an organisation in Scotland called Logos Scotland. It's a Christian organisation, and their intention is to publish material promoting a Christian worldview, particularly to politicians. I think that's basically what they're trying to do. So best of luck to them with that. And they published a report about a biblical view on immigration, which I read. And it, as far as I could tell, it came to the conclusion that Christians should believe in open borders. They shouldn't believe that a border should be a barrier. That seemed to be the conclusion. So I got in touch with them. I wrote a response to it. I sent it to them. I said, if I've got the wrong end of the stick here, if I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, I mean, please do tell me. But they've said, you know, that they don't really want to make any further comment. So I'm taking it that what they're arguing for is that Christian values that lead to the conclusion that we should have open borders and unrestricted immigration, a conclusion with which I disagree. So I've written a response to it at some length, and I'll be publishing that within the next few days. So you see it on social media. You'll need to click a link. It's far too long to put in a post. It'll be a document. But do have a look at it, and I would hope it would reward your, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes it would take to read it. So do have a look at that. I sometimes describe Scotland as the debate desert, don't I? I really love to debate these issues. I would love people to say, I'm basically saying to them, I think they're wrong. And I would like them to come back to me and say, no, we think you're wrong. Let's talk about it. That's the ideal for this is Scotland. And it's very rare to find the opportunity to have that sort of discussion, unfortunately. Right. Time is pressing on. Let's just have a look at a few comments. Humza only thinks of himself. Right, I'll be talking about that, actually. What are Humza Yousaf's core values? I used to say he hasn't got any. Then I changed my mind and said, being pro-Palestine, he really, really, really does believe in that. But now I'm having second thoughts. I'm thinking, is he really, really, really pro-Palestine? Because this is his opportunity to get back on the right side of the Muslims, whose beliefs he absolutely disregards routinely through the rest of his career. So I will be talking about that in my lecture on Humza Yousaf. Is obsessed with Humza Yousaf? No, I'm not. Incorrect. Humza Yousaf's the First Minister, and so commenting on his policies and him as a character in particular. I never did a lecture on Nicola Sturgeon or anyone else like that, but Humza Yousaf is unique in the amount of material there is to present about him, which is why I've chosen to do it. I'm sure Humza Yousaf doesn't think about the Scottish Family Party. He'll know we exist. He'll have heard mention of us from time to time, but no, I'm sure he's not lying awake now talking about thinking about the Scottish Family Party. I mean, my dream would be one day the First Minister will be lying awake worrying about the Scottish Family Party, because they'll have seen some polls, or they'll have had so many of their MSPs saying, look, people keep telling us they're not voting for us, they're going to vote for the Scottish Family Party. And that's the way you start exerting influence. Right. Let's just see the last questions here. Right, I haven't read this one completely, but right, okay. Hello, Christy. Why don't you get a hobby like a normal old man, like gardening or model trains or something? Why do you just punch down? The First Minister? Punching down at the First Minister? Okay, interesting. How do you know? I don't like gardening or model trains. I don't actually. Old? I don't know, is 55 old? I don't know. Anyway, thanks for that helpful and insightful comment, Christy. You keep them coming. Open borders, no borders equals no country. That's a very interesting point. One of the points I make in this paper is, I think it was 456 million people in sub-Saharan Africa. In other words, the bottom half of Africa. 456 million of them say they would like to emigrate to a richer country if they could. Okay, so that's sort of more or less about the whole population of Europe saying they would like to move to a different country. Now, in terms of solving, global inequality, we want to help people. People are poor, we want to help them. In terms of tackling global inequality, mass immigration doesn't help global inequality. If you have mass immigration, who emigrates from poor countries? Well, the richest people. So mass immigration, you take the richest people from poor countries and move them to rich countries where they tend to become relatively poor people. The people left in the poor country become poorer than ever, because some of the wealthiest and most productive people have been removed from that society, which leaves the society, I say, poorer still and with problems going forward. So, yeah, there are all sorts of issues there. Should an independent Scotland have tactical nuclear weapons? I think that's a very hypothetical question. The Scottish Family Party doesn't have a policy on nuclear weapons. In fact, no, actually, someone from CND, Scotland's version of CND, wrote to us a while ago saying, are you signing up to our election pledge? And I replied to them saying, no, but you'd be very welcome to come onto the live stream and we can have a discussion about it. But they never replied. Why did they not reply? Because Scotland is a debate desert. Almost always when you say to someone, okay, we seem to disagree, let's have a discussion. Silence. You can't get discussion. People don't want to debate. Hamza failed uppers. Yeah, I wonder if he's finished with that. I wonder if there's any more promotions he can get. Yes, been to the wedding, which I mentioned at the beginning. So that's that. Like racing cars, yes, true. As you can see on my shelf. Thank you, Scotland Scorpion. An excellent comment. Yeah, comment of the evening. Okay, there's 456 million people in sub-Saharan Africa. Where would they like to emigrate to? I think the question was, would you like to move to a rich country if you could? And the answer was yes. There have been some cases. There's one particular case, I can't remember the details of it. I think maybe it involves Cyprus, where because of some historical peculiarity, it ended up that there was total freedom of movement between a poor country and a rich country. And what happened was something like 40% of the population of the poorer country moved to the richer country. It's a case study that I should have at the tip of my tongue. I can't remember the details, but that is what happens. It's funny with immigration. There are lots of arguments about potential problems with mass immigration. But on the other hand, I mean, we all know lots of immigrants. And you think, the great people that, they've got no problem with them at all. We have to keep that in tension with the fact that we're not talking about individual people. We're talking about like demographic changes, large scale changes, and how they affect our society. Okay, right, disease prevention, right, that's an interesting one. Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons in 1994. We promised to protect them if needed. We're failing Ukraine. That is an interesting point. Ukraine did give up nuclear weapons. Now, if they hadn't given them up, would this have happened? Well, probably not. Some people talk about nuclear weapons. I find this a helpful way of talking about them as an existential deterrent. Now, by existential deterrent, what's meant by that is they deter people, they deter aggressors merely by their existence. It doesn't matter what your policy is about using them or whether or not you would ever use them. Just the fact that they exist deters people. And the parallel would be, if you're carrying a lot of money down to the road to the bank and you worry someone might rob you, if you take a baseball bat with you, that would be an existential deterrent. Even if you were someone who knew you would never hit anyone with a baseball bat, if someone came to steal your thing, you just give it to them. But the fact that you've got that it has an input into the thinking process of the aggressor or the thief. And they think a possible option here, I really don't know what's going to happen, but they've got a baseball bat. So it's possible They might use that. I need to factor that into my decision making. Maybe I'll wait for someone else with a bag of money. I'll leave this one alone. So that's what I mean by existential deterrence. So merely possessing it has a deterrent effect, a powerful deterrent effect. So that's an interesting topic. Who cares about Ukraine? We have our own problems. I think anyone should care about any situation in the world where people are suffering or where there's an injustice. I think in Ukraine, that is a classic case there. So yeah, I don't take the attitude that problems in other parts of the world are none of my business. Now, the extent to which the UK government or the Scottish government should try to intervene in them, well, that's an open question. You can discuss that. But I certainly care about what's happening in Ukraine and in any other part of the world as well. Right. Russian doctrines use tactical short-range battle nuclear weapons. They're of nuclear weapons. It's not existential, hence challenged. Right, I didn't mean existential in the sense of it threatens to cease the existence of the opponent. It's not existential in that sense. I almost clarified that, but I didn't. So you could say nuclear weapons make an I don't know how you'd word it, threaten the existence of your enemy, because you're going to obliterate them and wipe them off the face of the map and kill the whole population. That would be a threat to their existence. When I say nuclear weapons are an existential deterrent, what I mean is their very existence deters an aggressor. It's not that their use or the policy about the use or anything like that. Just their very existence deters an aggressor. That's what I was meaning there. Hello, Mr. Rich. Yeah, happy to come and do interviews on other channels. Do email contact@scottishfamily.org. Russia isn't the enemy. The enemy is within. Right, there can be more than one enemy, can't there? Russia isn't the enemy. Isn't the enemy of who? Russia is certainly the enemy of Ukraine because they invaded them. Yeah, there doesn't just need to be one enemy. So I'm not sure about that. Right. Right, let's leave things there then. Let's take that off. Right, thank you very much for another, well, I enjoyed it in any case. Very pleasant and interesting evening chatting together. Thanks for your comments. Do remember, I say we're looking for candidates at the moment. So email campaignmanager@scottishfamily.org if you'd like to do that. Generally, the people who would make the best candidates are the people who think, oh, I'm not sure I could do it. I think, no, it's not for me. I'm not good enough to do that. So just put yourself forward. Okay. Even if you end up thinking, no, I don't think I can do it, you will enjoy going through the process. And most likely you'll come out thinking, yeah, I could do this. This would be quite a challenge. This would be good. This would be a new experience. And who knows where it might lead. So do go ahead and do that. And plus 20th of March in your diary, Glasgow, my lecture about Humza Yousaf, which is, I assure you, is going to be extremely interesting. Right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for those watching later. I'll see you next week. Good night.